Hi, hello, and welcome to our session about exploring the new OSGi Features specification. My name is Carsten and together with me is David Borchardt. David is a senior engineer at Adobe. He's a long-time open source committer and TMC member of various Apache projects like Sling, Felix, Arias, and he's also a member of the OSGi working group. And also has worked on several of the OSGi specifications in the past years. I'm principal scientist at Adobe, also part of several open source projects like Sling, Felix, and so on, and also working on OSGi specifications. So let's get started and talk about features. In this presentation, we'll cover several topics. First of all, some motivation on why features is a good thing. Then we talk about the new specification around that, and then talk a little bit about all the stuff that has been done around features in Apache Sling, and to round up the whole session with a demo and a small outlook at the end. So let's get started with the real content and talk about why features at all. You might have in the past had a similar discussion like we have here on the screen at a coffee corner or wherever, right? So this is a dialogue between two employees, and I'm I'm playing both of them. So, but I guess it will be understandable. So, hey, I saw your great project. Did you look at the Apache Felix Web Console? I think it would pretty well fit your project as well. And let me show you some nice things here. Oh yeah, that looks really cool. Where do I find it? Oh, it's just an OSGi bundle. You will find it on Maven Central. Here are the Maven coordinates. Just download it and install it. Okay, great. I tried it, but yeah, it actually doesn't resolve. Oh, yes, sure. Yeah, right. Forgot about that. You need 3 more bundles, 3 of these libraries. Here are the Maven coordinates. Okay. I installed them as well. Now everything resolves. Most of the stuff seems to work, but actually upload is broken. Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Don't use the latest version of that library. You have to use this particular version 1.3.4, and then everything will be fine. Okay, great. Yeah, works now, upload working fine, but still my application looks pretty different than yours. Ah, yeah, right. Okay, in addition to all these bundles, just install these 2 additional OSGi configurations with all these values and properties, and then install the additional optional theme bundle. And then everything will look pretty fine, and you have the same experience as we have in our application. Does it sound familiar to you? I hope so. So in this little example, you can see that usually adding a new functionality to your application requires more than just adding the bundle. You need to think about dependencies, configurations, and so on. And this brings us into why features are important, because with that, you can share a set of these things. If we look at the next slide, please. Without features, a typical application consists of bundles, configurations, and maybe other resources that you're using in your application. Bundles are made up of packages, and packages have classes. Now, if you want to share now parts of these applications to others, you would specify all these individual things and all the details, and it probably goes wrong at some point in time. Now, with features, you can aggregate, assemble your whole application out of features, which allow you for a higher level building blocks. And features itself, then it consists of bundles, configurations, and all that stuff. And with features, you then have these higher building blocks. And if we go to the next slide, please, David. Thanks. And these basically allow you to have a reusable definition that you can pass someone else about a complete feature, right? So you can just make up this web console feature, for example, which lists all the bundles you need, all the configuration, the theme part, and give it to someone else. And that person can just install that feature and everything works directly without this going back and forth and figuring out what else is needed. Features by itself is not really a new thing. We have them for quite a lot of years, and you probably already have encountered several use cases or scenarios where features are used. They are pretty useful for example, building blocks for microservices, right? If you're building a series of microservices and you want that each of them behaves the same with respect, for example, to logging, monitoring, the web stack that you're using, then you can define those things as features and then simply reuse these higher building blocks across the microservice. Plugins like plugins for Eclipse is another good example. Or if you want to provision something which is more than just a bundle, again, features are pretty useful. And with features and having a specification around it, we can have some interoperability between the different solutions. Like I said, features is not something new. They exist, for example, in Apache Karaf for quite some time, in Eclipse, in Apache Sling, and various other projects. But they all work slightly different, have a different way of describing them. And most important, they all are bound to how these features will be used at runtime. Right? If you, for example, specify a Karaf feature, you need to have a Karaf runtime, similar with Eclipse and other things. So we wanted to have this specification of features being runtime independent, so you can just share the, let's say, the contents, and then whoever is using that feature decides on how to use them. Similar to a bundle, right? The bundle by itself does not tell you how it is provisioned later on. And that brings us into the OSGi specification, and over to David.
Okay, thanks, Carsten. Yes, so there is now a new OSGi specification that talks about features. So let's have a brief look at what that is. But before I get into that, let me start by saying that OSGi is now a project at Eclipse. And this is really great news, because all of the work in OSGi is now done fully open source. So if you're interested in kind of contributing to an OSGi spec, or working on a TCK or a compatible implementation, you could just join in and contribute. Right now, we've just completed Compendium R8, and we're starting on new R9 work. So if you're interested, now is a really good time to join, and the link here on the screen will give you all of the information. So as I said, Compendium R8 is now finished, and one of the specifications is the new feature server specification. And this specification is basically a baseline that, as Carsten said, can be used to build other technologies on top of. And right now, it is just the feature model itself, where you can specify bundles, configurations. You can add custom metadata or custom extensions into the feature model, so you can keep all the information that belongs to your application together in one feature and one file. And it also supports something called variables, which allow you to do late binding of certain configurations. You can find the feature spec at this link here on the screen. So the spec provides a JSON model, which looks like the model on the right-hand side, but it also provides an API to make it easy to read and write this model. So this is kind of a building block for if you want to write an authoring tool where you can create features, or you can also use a text editor, obviously, but maybe you want to create some sort of a fancy tool for it. Or build time tooling, which is really interesting. I have an example of that later in the demo. And finally, another important tool is a feature launcher, because you ultimately want to be able to launch your feature as well, because this is ultimately going to be a running system. Now, if we have a quick look at the feature on the right, just to, it doesn't show all of the concepts that are available, but just a few. Features always have an ID. They typically have a name. They can have some other, metadata that is not shown here. But they typically have bundles. So let's say this is a little application of 4 bundles, and you can already see that one of the bundles has some custom metadata. It has a custom property for documentation. This is something that you might use in your tooling. Maybe you're generating Javadoc for your application and you need this special metadata to be able to do this. You also see that there's a complete flag in the feature. This simply says if the feature is complete, then it doesn't need anything else in order to run it. It's basically transitively closed. So if you have a launcher and your feature is complete, then you can just launch it and it should work. Then here, a little example. It's the same feature again, but just a little example of what the feature API looks like. The API on the right is basically used to create the feature on the left. I left out some of the details, but basically you obtain a feature service from the service registry, and then you can start building your feature using builders that you obtain from this feature service. And finally, you can use the feature service to write the feature to disk or to read it from disk. Now, features are heavily influenced by Apache Sling features, and Carsten is going to talk about them now.
Yes, right. Thanks, David. Yes. So basically, like I think 4 years ago, we started a new approach in Apache Sling and wanted to define a new feature functionality. And we came up with what I'm presenting now. And as David said, that was heavily used as input for the specification. But of course, we used already existing feature solutions from other projects as well. So not just Sling. So we came up with this JSON format, which is similar to the OSGi feature specification format. But as we already are 4 years into the development of that thing, we compared to the specification, we have more tooling, more features, more functionality in a feature. For example, we have the concept of feature archives, where you can just bundle up a feature with all its contents, like the bundles, the OSGi configurations, and additional resources, whatever is in there, into a single zip file in the end. So that's quite nice. When we designed the feature model, next slide, please, David. We tried to clearly separate the different phases of, let's say, the life cycle of a feature, starting with the authoring. So authoring, you can use a normal text editor to edit a JSON file. That's not really very complicated to do. But we also wanted to provide a functionality to deploy these features like into a Maven repository, so make it discoverable by others and usable by other teams or other projects in the end. And so we added some Maven mechanism around it, a plugin, which also makes the authoring a little bit easier, because sometimes, for example, if you have large text blocks in JSON, that's a little bit ugly to code in there. There's some additional support. So with that, you can author your features, deploy them to a Maven repository, make them discoverable for others. But a feature by itself, or a single feature by itself, is probably not what you want to launch or execute later on, right? Your application is made of a lot of features, several features. So you need something that aggregates them. And we have a Java API there, a command line interface, and a Maven plugin around the Java API, which defines on how to aggregate several features into a single larger feature. Once you have aggregated everything that you want to use later on, then it's probably good to analyze these features. And that's, I think, one of the most important phases, at least it turned out for us, because you can now basically validate that feature against several rules before you actually launch it, and therefore ensure that the feature, the whole feature, your application, will work at runtime. You can check bundle exports and imports if they are all satisfied. You can check your configurations if they are sane, and whatever analyzing tasks you want to do, you can just implement them with a simple Java interface and run them on your final feature and see if everything is fine and probably able to run. So once everything is nice and looks green, then you can probably launch your feature. And again, Sling has different toolings around that. You can create a single jar with a framework embedded, all the bundles embedded, configurations embedded, and so on, which you can just execute and it launches. Similar, we have a command line tool which you can use, and David will show that later on in the demo, where you can just specify some features and it will basically find all the included bundles, launch a framework, deploy the bundles, configurations, and everything will run. And we also have a nice tool that transforms a Sling feature into a Carafe feature. So you can then directly use them in Carafe. Because right now, all these solutions don't use a standard yet, right? So we have to use these tools in between. Then we have some extensions in Sling, and this is just to show you the potential of features. Now, what we, for example, found out was that there's that a concept like API regions makes sense, similar to what OSGi subsystems provides you, but slightly different. If you think about a feature, it has a lot of bundles with public API, but you don't want that users of your feature are able to use all of that public API of those bundles within that feature. So you want to restrict that. And this is where these regions come in. So you can specify whether packages, it's all based on packages like bundles, whether packages can be used globally by everyone in your application or only by parts of the system. And we also have some examples on this slide for that one, which is a JSON, in JSON format, as the whole feature model is JSON. It uses an extension where you can code any additional information that you want. And here it just specifies these two regions, the global and internal region, with the packages that are available to other participants in the same region, right? Just as an additional feature, we added the possibility to mark a whole package as deprecated without requiring to add the annotations to the source and recompiling that project. This is, for example, pretty useful if you think about you're providing a framework to others and you want that they migrate, for example, from, I don't know, HTTP client version 3 or 4 to version 5, the latest one, right? The older versions are not really deprecated in the source code as part of the open source project, but still you want to provide some hints to users of your API. And in combination with analyzers, you can then do all the magic, ensure that the regions are met, that no deprecated packages are used, and so on. The other thing, we did the same region trick for OSGi configurations, which might be interesting to some of you. So you can basically separate between internal configurations that are only used by, let's say, your framework, and global configurations that can be used and changed by applications on top of your framework. And with that, we have defined a DSL for specifying those configurations, which properties can be configured, what types these properties have, additional validation rules, like you can specify ranges or enumerations, regular expressions, and all these various things. So that's very, very handy for specifying your configuration surface. And finally, the last point I would like to mention are exactly these analyzers I talked a little bit earlier on, right? Sling comes already with a huge set of these, checking the normal OSGi things, package imports, exports. But we also, for example, have one that checks for native libraries if you don't want them in your final application, and a lot of more things. That's just to give you a brief idea of what is possible once you're using features. And with that, I think we are ready for the demo.
Thanks, Carsten. Yes. Let me show a little demo. Right, so let's say I've written a little servlet which is a bundle using the HP Whiteboard service implementation. Now, this is a payment servlet, and it just handles some payments mechanisms. And I won't show the code, but it's just a bundle that uses HP Whiteboard. Now, to actually run that, you need a few bundles. It doesn't run by itself. So this project actually provides a payments feature model as a convenience. And it looks like this. You can see it has an ID, and this is my bundle here, but it also has some other bundles that it needs, like declarative services, HP Whiteboard, and some other dependencies. So that's really handy, because then I don't have to find those, as Carsten said at the beginning, just to run this one bundle. Let me just launch it. The bundle registers a servlet at the /ps context. So I'm running it here. There's my payment service. You see all the money on the screen. It's working. Now let's have a quick look at another feature that we can, or another capability we can use here, and that is the analyzers that Carsten just mentioned. Now I only configured 2 here. This one checks that all the imports are satisfied by exports, and this one checks that all the requirements are satisfied by capabilities. So let's say if I forget to specify a DS implementation, and I run the Maven build now, instead of failing at runtime, which is never really great, we can see that it starts to fail at build time and clearly tells us that we've done something wrong and that we need to provide an additional component. So it'll tell us early enough that we have done something, that we forgot something. There's also some warnings in there. I won't get into that. They have something to do with optionals that are not really that important. So now that's just a project by itself. Now let's go look at a slightly bigger system. I'm writing my new larger project called Perfect Solution, and I want to use the payment service in that. Now there's only one problem. Perfect Solution is also starting with PS, so I want to use the PS context in there and not have it used by the payment service. So what I do here is I'm going to relocate the payment service to a different location /payments. And I do this by simply adding an additional feature model that adds some configuration to basically tell that server to go somewhere else. And in order to do that, I also have to add config-admin, because that actually processes this configuration. So it basically shows that you can reuse an existing feature and slightly tweak it to your needs without actually having to change that original feature, which is important because we want to be able to pick these things up from Maven, and they are basically immutable once they're in Maven, in the Maven repository. So now here I'm going to launch it again. I've got the same feature launcher with 2 features, the one that we showed earlier from the project itself, and the other one with my tweak. And let's have a look. Is it working? Now I'm going to the /ps. /ps is free again. And yes, I've relocated it. So that worked. Now finally, I'm going to show one more thing. What might be necessary is in some cases, you might want to do some troubleshooting because you don't know what's going on or something is slightly different. You may want to run the web console. And as Carsten said at the very beginning of this talk, sometimes the web console is not super trivial to launch because it needs a few different things. So what I do here now is I'm basically combining the 2 features that I already had with another feature that provides the web console. So basically I'm composing my system together from 3 features, 2 of which are more or less totally independent. So let's see if my payment service works again here. Yeah, and now let's see if now the web console is available as well. Yeah, it's here. So I can now do my troubleshooting and make changes or do whatever I want to do with the web console. And the nice thing is, once this is done, once I'm happy, I can basically remove the web console again from my set of features if I want to give this to a customer as an application, and it won't need to be there. Okay, going quickly back to the presentation, just the outlook of the whole idea. Obviously, features give you nicely standardized, shareable, reusable, higher level building blocks. we would like to see that they are supported in the various projects. We want to, for example, bring Apache Sling up to the specification, but hopefully other projects will do that as well and start supporting this specification. And another thing we are planning on doing is adding new specifications in OSGi that build on top of the feature model. And with that, we're done. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Here's a question. Is there a reference implementation that includes OSGi features? I guess I can take that since I wrote it. Yes, there is one in the Apache Felix project. So this is one of the other things that I didn't really mention yet. Even though OSGi specs are now at Eclipse, it doesn't mean that implementations, which are now not called reference implementations anymore, but just compatible implementations, they don't have to be at Eclipse. So this one is at Apache Felix. It's only the spec right now that it implements, which is the API and the JSON model itself. But it can be a nice starting point if you want to build additional tooling on top of it, because it already provides you the API.
Okay, the other question, I at least will read the question.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to read the question.
Yeah, no problem. So the question is about how the OSGi features relate to features, for example, in Eclipse update sites, and that they seem to serve a slightly different purpose. Not sure, David, if you could say something about that. I'm not that familiar with Eclipse.
So yeah, so the question is how OSGi features relate to Eclipse update sites. Now, I know that Eclipse uses a concept called features as well, which are kind of related in some way, but they are again used. They have a lot of additional implementation on top of it. I know you can select features when you want to add additional functionality to your Eclipse installation, and they come from a P2 update site, as far as I understand. The concept is similar. I think it is a collection of bundles. But yeah, the details are obviously different. But I would think that Eclipse update sites features could potentially support OSGi features in the future. I think it would be nice to try and achieve that. Okay, another question. Is there a plan to implement it in Equinox? I'm not an Equinox committer, but I think that if it was implemented in Eclipse, it would probably be implemented in its own project, because as far as I know, Equinox is more like the framework itself. But I do not know of such a plan. There might be, but yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
And maybe to add to that a little bit, the current specification basically just covers the feature model itself, and the implementation of that, or the specification includes an API, and the implementation of that is a simple library which allows you to read and write features or create features, right, and store them. And that is basically reusable everywhere. I wouldn't expect that anyone else is really implementing that again, but just reusing that library. And then all the functionality on top would then just use that library and provide additional value based on these features from the specification.
So what I would hope is that various projects provide their implementation of a feature launcher. This is one other area that I think we could potentially do an OSGi spec on. If multiple people are interested, I think that might be very interesting to do. But right now, we have the launcher in Apache Sling, which is also not compliant with the spec. But it would already be nice if there could be various implementations that could take the spec-defined features and launch them.
The next question is similar, or goes into the same direction. It's about whether Karaf features are expected to support the new feature specification. I guess the answer is yes. A simple yes in this case. Yeah.
Okay, next question is, oh, it's a comment. Somebody commented, I don't know who the was making the comment that B&D Tools plans to support feature support in the future. So that's really great to hear.
Okay, I guess
we're out of
that's
time.
also, yeah. Thank you very much for attending, and yeah, enjoy the
the
rest of the
conference.
conference. Yeah.